Okay, so warm welcome everyone to our lunchtime learning sessions. We've been hosting these over the past couple of months, covering topics and sharing skills around adaptation. Um, Today we're going to be hearing from expert speakers, sharing their knowledge with us and giving a Forth Valley setting for some of the solutions that we'll cover. Please do keep an eye out on our Eventbrite page if you're interested in climate events, and also sign up to our free membership, as that'll give you the best head start for any new events and things that we have coming up. Um, we will hear from both our speakers. We've got myself here today, so I'm Steffi from the Climate Action Hub team, and also Isabella from the Climate Action Hub team, who will be sort of monitoring chat and looking after you all. But we're also joined today by our colleague Arleen from the Climate Action Hub team, who's going to talk about soil health, and also Kate Sankey from West Moss Side Farm. So just to say, these lunchtime learning sessions feed into our larger piece of work as Forth Valley's Climate Action Hub. We're raising awareness of climate actions that can be realised in our area and amplifying some of the fantastic work that's already being achieved. So once we hear from both speakers, there'll be some time for questions and answers and discussions. So if you have anything along the way, please again just pop them in the chat. And just to say that these recordings will be up on our YouTube channel shortly after, and we hope to add a bit more information, such as maybe slides and things like that, a bit later on once the full series has run. So without waffling too much longer, I was going to introduce our first speaker, which is our lovely colleague Arleen. If you're happy to go ahead, Arleen, please go for it.
Thanks, Steffi. So I'm Arleen Sinclair. I'm one of the Climate Action Hub officers in the Forth Valley Climate Hub. I've just realised that this is at the very end of the slides. Good start. I'm going to talk to you today about soil health. I am unfortunately not an expert in soil health. I just have a massive passion for soil. I studied my permaculture design certificate around 15 years ago and worked in permaculture projects, and then worked as a natural builder, working a lot with soil actually. And I've also worked a few years as an ecological garden designer. So my hands have been in soil most of my life and have really understood the benefits of a healthy soil system. And so I'm just going to do a wee whistle-stop tour of the history and importance of soil health. If you I am not moving forward with it. Oh, there we go. It's on the. All right. So, can you see my first slide there? Yeah. Great. So I just thought I'd start with the nutrient cycle. So here we have a tree, but this could be any plant. And it's just the basics of understanding how soil really works. So obviously the tree or the plant drops its leaves or its organic material, and this gets broken down in the soil by all the wonderful microbes that are in there and the decomposers. And they break that down into an organic material, which can mean that the nutrients are now available for that plant or for other plants to then reabsorb those nutrients and for those plants to grow. So it's a really beautiful system, and it is the basis of what I'm going to talk about today. So what exactly is soil that we're talking about? So often when we talk, especially as gardeners, we often talk about soil being topsoil, but there are a number of different layers in the soil system. Humus is the top layer, which is like decaying plant material. This is where seeds will germinate and where plants start to grow. And then the topsoil is where those roots are taking hold. And this is what we most likely will know as the soil systems that we look for when we're gardening, to understand what kind of plants might grow in those conditions. And that topsoil can vary massively depending on what's below it and what's happening above it as far as environmental conditions. And then below the topsoil, you can often see quite a distinct mark where you've got subsoil, which will be created from a whole other, potentially even another age that's below it. So you can often see when you do a soil pit, you can dig into your soil and into your garden or the land that you're managing, and you can really see the difference. There's usually a very distinct line between the subsoil and the topsoil. And this subsoil could be a very thick layer of like clay-rich material, which will mean that the water doesn't freely drain from your soil. So that will really impact what will grow up there. Or potentially this could also be limestone that's underneath, and that will also impact the pH level of the soil. And so then under there, we've got the weathered rock fragments and bedrock. So you, in one site or one garden, you may even have two different distinct bedrocks below it, depending on the geological features, and they will create quite a different soil. And that in itself will then depict what you're able to grow and the quality of soil that you're able to achieve in that area. And obviously throughout this, you can see the root systems going down. And this is a key part of a healthy soil system, because often the root systems are what are paving the way for aerating the soil, creating space for the different microorganisms to live within the soil. So a healthy soil system is full of wonderful microorganisms. I've got some wonderful pictures at the end to show you so we can get to know these beings and how beautiful they are. But it's just an understanding that the soil is made up of, in fact, half of the world's animals live in the soil, and the majority of animals live off of the soil. So plants that are growing it are within the soil. And you've got everything from different fungi, bacteria, and insects that are surviving in here. They're basically, I think we go on about ecosystem service engineers with the wolves and beavers, but it's worms and these mesopaunas are called, that are creating habitat, that are restoring soil so that we can then have a stronger habitat above ground. And this is a healthy biodiverse soil system that has this. You can also see the roots that are coming down there from the grasses. After the roots, you start to see a mycorrhizal system, which is also known as the wood wide web, which is not only, so this system is like a symbiotic relationship with each root system, and mycorrhizal, so it's mycelium and roots. And basically each plant will have its own mycorrhizal system. Some of them are shared, and it really helps the roots to be able to tap down deeper into the soil for nutrients and supplies for growing. And yeah, it's actually one of the oldest and largest organisms on this planet is a mycorrhizal system. I believe it's in Oregon, but definitely in America, and essential for soil health. So how is soil created? So I thought I'd just go back to a basic form of succession to show you how important it is, especially with the state of our soils at the moment. So this process of primary succession takes hundreds of years. So you've got bare rock on the left-hand side, and pioneer species such as lichens and mosses appear. And once they start to decay and release organic material, you start the beginning of soil creation is happening. So this will happen on, as it says, bare rock, or it could be happening in deserts as well. And from there, you will get grasses and perennials, further pioneer species, and start at the beginning of shrubs that will appear. And as these decay and create more soil, they create habitat that will eventually be able to host the big climax climax community of larger tree species such as oak, which require obviously very deep roots that are able to burrow down into the soil. So as I say, this takes hundreds of years. But what happens with secondary succession There we go. So secondary succession is when there is an impact to the plants that are above the ground. So that could be something like forest fires, which we're seeing an awful lot more of with climate change. Could be volcanic eruptions, an ice age even, which officially we are still in an ice age because some parts of the earth have got ice caps. But at some points, 10,000 years ago, Scotland was retreating out of an ice age. So any of these impacts mean that there is still soil that's been built up over hundreds of years below the surface. So the process of soil creation isn't as extensive, and it means that pioneer species can take hold much quicker because they've got root systems. So we can really see the importance of a healthy soil system. Even with fires, there's certain shrubs that are associated with that that will return to those forests very quickly and start to begin the process of allowing more shade-tolerant tree species to grow in amongst the shrubs, and we can return to a climax community forest relatively quickly. It says here 150 plus years. So the process is not as fast, I believe, as it's a bit more complex than the mass tree planting that we have planned. So you're just looking at what the ecosystem services of the soil. Why is soil so important? As I said, it hosts most of as a habitat for most living things, it says at the bottom, but it's also air quality and composition, because when the soil isn't healthy and the dust and different chemicals and particles within the soil aren't being retained within the soil, this causes poor air quality. We often think of air quality as coming from chemicals that we are emitting, but it can also come from the soil. We see that in, with the sand dunes, the desert dust that comes across some of the regions of the earth. So it's a really important part of a healthy ecosystem. Temperature regulation. So actually, you'll know how good an insulator soil is when you touch the soil on a warm day if you go doing gardening. It's actually quite warm. So it's actually like an insulative layer, I suppose, for the earth. It's also really important um, for seed germination to be of a certain temperature, and also can cause issues now because our soils are remaining too warm. They're not getting as cold as they used to be, which means a lot of the plants within the temperate region are not necessarily, the seeds are not necessarily germinating, so have to be in forced germination through freezers basically for a number of weeks over the winter. So that's a direct impact of poor soil health and obviously climate change issues. A third point on this, we're going to go into a bit more detail in a couple of slides. So it's really a massive carbon sink and nutrient cycling. So it's 2.5 times, no, it's twice the amount of carbon is stored in the world's soils than the atmosphere, all of plants and all of animals put together. Double that is held in the soil. We often think about carbon being trapped in trees and plants, but really most of it is in the soil. But we will look at a wonderful infographic in a minute. So yeah, it's an important part of water cycling and quality. So a lot of chemicals that go into that are in water through agriculture or industrial waste. The soil acts as a filtration system and is able to filter out the chemicals and reuse them. Um, uh, and it's a decomposer. It's a really important part of the system because of all the microbes that exist in there. It'll break down all the fungi, will break down any of the waste material that's seen as waste by some other organism, treat it, and then allow it to be reused by different organisms. It's super soil. Um, and it's a habitat for most living things and their food. Yeah, so just wanted to have a quick look at the main biomes of the world so that you can understand sort of where we are. It's basic school geography here, but just to have an understanding of what is tree coverage, what's it's mainly the green coloured ones are different types of tree coverage. So taiga or boreal forest, and then the deciduous forest and the tropical rainforest. And then the amount of desert, so that's the orange one and it's kind of along the middle, obviously along the top of North Africa and then Central Asia, and in America as well, and Australia, and other pockets. We're seeing the largest rise in desertification. It's unprecedented how quickly it's happening. And this is because of our poor soil quality, and very quickly we're seeing areas that used to be so fertile, such as around the Aral Sea, that had their nutrients and water extracted for large scale, in this case, cotton farming. And then within 50, 60 years, it's become desert, and the whole of the Aral Sea, not the whole, a lot of the Aral Sea had dried up. It's quite interesting to look at that. And that's basically from depleting nutrients from the soil. But we're seeing desertification being caused across these region and spreading, and it's one of the biggest issues that we're going to face because of what I was saying about air pollution as well. We're seeing these dust storms from these areas because there's nothing there to absorb any moisture that does fall. It's not being absorbed by those lovely root systems. So yeah, these are the main biomes in the world, and this is their ability to store carbon. So this, once you start to see, so if you look at this wonderful infographic on the bottom part, so these are different biomes, on the bottom parts with the dark green semicircles, that is the ability of the soil, the amount of carbon that's trapped in the soil. And then above ground, above the line, in the sort of lighter green, is the amount of carbon that's trapped within plants and animals that exist in those biomes. And this is not on the earth. This is basically per tons per hectare at a depth of 1 meter below the ground. So what really, there's a couple of things in here I want to draw attention to. One is if you look at wetlands, like that is a massive amount, double the amount of the second biggest one, boreal forest or taiga. And it's got the best ability to trap carbon within the soil. And it's wetter and cooler soils that are able to trap carbon. So we in Scotland have a massive potential, especially in the Forth Valley. We are within a floodplain throughout the Forth Valley, and there is so much potential for wetland restoration. And I believe some of that may come into what Kate's going to talk about in a minute. But my other thing I found lovely about this infographic is the tropical forests. It's nearly a perfect circle of the balance there that you find around the kind of equator, this perfect balance of the amount of carbon that's within the soil and the amount of carbon that's within the plants is almost like this perfect cycle. Um, I just quite like that. But yeah, this just shows you the true importance of proper soil health. And our concern often with soil is about how we produce food. So I just pulled together some of these facts from the World Soil Day, which is on the 5th of December every year. But this is from one of the United Nations reports, and it's just some interesting fact about our soils in relation to our food. So 95% of our food comes from soils, which is quite surprising. That's directly and indirectly. I thought it would be 100%, but obviously we are producing an awful lot from chemicals and whatever else. I won't get into that. And 33% of our soils are degraded. Again, I think this figure is to do with agriculture, and I've heard much higher percentages of soil being degraded. And I think this is it's basically can't eat it. Yeah, I have heard and read that it's much more of topsoil, definitely. I just wanted to go through some of these notes though, because some of them are quite interesting. The next one is it can take up to 1,000 years to produce just 2 to 3 centimeters of soil. Um, so yeah, we've got a long road ahead of us in replacing some of the soil. Soils supply 15 of the 18 naturally occurring chemical elements essential to plants. So yeah, although there are other options for growing, soil is the most natural way of making sure that we're getting the right elements into our food. And there are more living organisms in a tablespoon of soil than people on Earth. I just find that astonishing. And over the last 70 years, the level of vitamins and nutrients in food has drastically decreased, and that's because of the lack of vitamins and nutrients in our soil, because we are no longer getting the same microorganisms within the soil. So we're therefore not able to fulfill the nutrient cycle, and therefore we are now impoverished food-wise. So 2 billion people, that's a quarter of the world, suffer from lack of micronutrients known as the hidden hunger. And I think if we started to really realize the impact it's having on our bodies and our ability to cope with further chemicals within the air, there would be, yeah, we would do much more to support soil health. So agriculture will have to increase by 60% to meet the demand in 2050. And up to 58% more food could be produced through sustainable soil management. So there's a real understanding that we can and could change the way we manage our land in order to produce much more food without having to expand that. And also up to half of our household waste could be composted to nurture our soil. I'm not sure where that statistic is exactly from in which regions, but I know that we do a lot more composting and biodigesting in this country than we did before. So that's always good news. So that is the food system. And then living. So I love this fact when I worked as a natural builder that 1/3 of the world's population still lives in earth-built homes. So that's adobe brick, it's mud brick, there's all sorts. We've even got a tradition in Scotland of using mud. I can't remember what it's called now. Mud brick, we'll call it, but it's not brick. And I just love that we are disconnected from that in the West, but actually our connection to the earth has always been, we've had such a strong understanding of how it works that we have built from it for forever, really, in regions that that's possible to do so. So what has been happening on a global scale? I mean, I had some inkling this was happening, but the last 10 years, we've just completed the International Decade of Soils declared by the UN, as a bid to get more funding, I suppose, more awareness, and a commitment from different government, I suppose, to be able to dedicate more funds, I suppose, resources to make sure our soils are in good health. And I feel like we are not quite there even after 1 decade of engagements on it. UN also states the reasons for our decline in soil health are we're seeing much more drought, especially in North African. We're seeing drought across. We saw a version of drought in the tropics in 2022, where it was the driest year on record, where we saw fires and everything as well. So it's like this is what can cause ultimately, which is causing soil health degradation. Um, and that is, as I was saying before, the particles are able to circulate. They also when we have periods of drought, the soil isn't able to absorb water because ultimately after we've had drought, we can often have flooding. Again, which we saw in the storm in 2022, Arwen, where we had a dry year and then And so the roots were no longer properly established in the soil. They'd kind of gone into a bit of a state of shock. And then we saw a big storm, and a lot of the trees came over. And so what we're seeing then is like the land is being degraded through these severe climate issues, but also through erosion. So without healthy root systems and healthy microorganisms, water will just wash away soil, and it'll go straight down into the burns and streams and into the sea, which in itself causes the nitrification of the oceans and acidification. So all of these lovely nutrients are going into our oceans. Industrial farming, so heavy use of chemicals and pollutions are causing the soils to lose some of those organisms. And the fifth reason that the UN takes is a change in our diet and nutrition, but I'm not exactly sure if that it's the chicken and the egg. What came first is the change in agriculture, or whether our diets have changed to be less nutrient rich. So how did we get here? I always like to go back to the Stone Age and the beginning of our time as farmers. So we're looking back 10,000 years, less in certain places. And even when we started, we're moving away from nomadic times into a period of where we can remain in kind of in one place and build homes. And we start to, the beginning of this is that we recognize that we can plant seeds directly from grains. Our diets start to be more grain rich at this point, and lots of things start to change and shift. And as you can see from the system here is, we were planting these grains for the crop to appear next year. It's a closed loop system. The grains are cooked and prepared on the land, and then the nutrients are processed directly there. The humans put it into the earth, and probably in some sort of managed way, and the nutrients stay within that system. So we are part of that system. And we remain in this way for some time. We're like as animals, I suppose, until we realize we can store grain. And then this is what then gives a bit of power to people. And from there, you see these larger kind of townships growing where grain is used as a commodity. And it's then started to be exchanged with other regions for other things that they are growing. And we still live like that for quite a few hundreds of years in kind of basic harmony with the landscape and the nutrient cycle until the Romans come along. And this is the first time we see mass movements of nutrients. So the Romans are growing all of their produce across the Mediterranean, and it's getting shipped over the Mediterranean, and those nutrients are being consumed and deposited within a different habitat within Europe, and on a huge scale to feed, all of the Roman Empire as well. And this nutrient cycle is just the beginning of that, where we then start to move into a global agricultural system, which grows to become the Green Revolution. Post-war, where we start to recognize that we can use these chemicals used in warfare to grow our plants. I still laugh every time I think that that's where we're at. So obviously this has an impact on what can live on the food that we or the animals that we are eating are consuming. So yeah, so where are we in Scotland? Coming back to Scotland context, the State of Scotland Soils report was compiled in 2011, and recently UK government compiled a similar report in 2023, and both have identified that there's a lack of understanding, a lack of monitoring and understanding of our soils within in the regions. Also identified that erosion and compaction through agriculture, and erosion through all sorts of environmental conditions are threatening our soil health, and that's it across lots of different habitats as well. One thing to come out of that has been this website that I really love, is Scotland Soils. And it has a really interesting set of maps that you can look at the different soil conditions that you might have on your land. And also you can identify whether you've got potential for what type of forestry, what type of agriculture. Still got a lot of work to do, I think, to update some of the data on it, but it is a really useful start to understand the discussion as we move into how we use our land, whether that's for forestry, for biomass, whether it's for nature restoration, for ecosystem services, or whether it's for food growing, or for raising animals. There's so many other options, or even indeed for renewable technologies for wind farms. This discussion is something that's not going to go away, but this understanding what the soil is beneath our feet means we are more able to identify what the use for that land should be. And yeah, so that's a big process that we are really probably about to embark on for the next, for a long period now. What I love about this is that it shows you the kind of Forth Valley part there. So in the light blue, mineral glaze. So a lot of the Forth Valley, which we operate out of, and the mouth of the Forth into Fife and into East Lothian, is these mineral glaze. That whole region there, the bottom of the Highland boundary fault, would have been under the sea a few thousand years ago. So as the glacial melt retreated, it deposited a lot of these wonderful minerals, which means that this is actually a very good, well, because of those minerals, it's good for arable plants, arable farming, but sadly it's also quite waterlogged. So, but I think Kate will talk further about the Forth Valley context. And just going to our understanding of soils, as someone who used to work in the waste industry, we'll say, I'm always interested in this figure here. So this is the waste generated over a period since 2011 until 2022. Commercial on the left-hand side, construction on the right, and then household on the bottom. And when I look at this, glaringly, I see orange. What that is the biggest tonnage of waste generated. And that orange is actually classified as soils. And those soils generally obviously come from construction and demolition, and they're often subsoils that have been extracted for construction sites, but they're also often contaminated soils, topsoils and subsoils that are contaminated from industrial processes. And then we see the waste landfilled, that orange line still remains. So in 2022, it still makes up just under a third of what is landfilled. And you might ask, why does that matter if it's soil that's going back into landfill? But the problem is that it's useful soil, it just happens to be contaminated with different chemicals, is now being added into these landfill sites for, I'm going to call it a chemical soup, for future generations to come across. Whereas there are, I mean, that's me simplifying it, obviously, but there are other methods to deal with this instead of extracting it and moving it and then paying for it to be put into landfill. So there is bioremediation and mycoremediation, so bio being plants and myco being mushrooms, and both have an ability to, certain plants and certain mushrooms will accumulate some of the heavy metals. Mushrooms are hyper accumulators at heavy metals, and they soak it up basically 1,000 times more than what's in the soil, and they basically become a really good miner of that heavy metal, and that can be taken away and then the heavy metal can be extracted. Plants are very good with hydrocarbons, so any oil or any issues with that. So instead of just scraping it, we can be planting things on it and using microremediation. So just looking at what we actually have and what we could protect and how soils could play a very important part of that. I just love some of these species and wanted to bring us back to the wonder that is this earth, and this is whole Scotland as well, and what you can do to help protect the habitats and help protect the soil in the area that you manage or your own garden. So it's get to know your soil. So do a soil pit, do soil pits throughout your space, understand the different layers, and wait, watch, and learn the land. So spend some time with the land, and then make sure that you're planting the right plant in the right place and in its right form. Sometimes we go really into like buying plants in pots that have come from machines in Europe, when actually using some seeds from locally sourced seeds from plants that are genetically diverse in our area is actually the answer. Use no-dig gardening. Dedicate an area of your garden to no digging. Even if you're growing vegetables, there's a lot of perennial vegetables. You can also just add more plants as you go, and slowly you're recreating that succession of the depth of the soil, really creating it and adding in all this wonderful nutrients. Understand the habitats that are available, so understand what environmental conditions you are, what's shaded, what's not. Understand where the water lands on the earth, where's the wet parts, where are the animals going, and then recreate small habitats. That's where habitats can be found on the edges. You don't have to put in a pond. You just have to dig a hole. And then all these edges is where from that hole it'll be a wetter place where the water will maybe stay. It maybe creates a small place, a watering hole for insects and smaller animals to come and drink from. But it might also just create a mini wetland. Um, we've been flattening and straightening lines for so long. It's time that we unflatten on Earth. Yeah, compost directly on soil so that your worms, your ecosystem engineers can grow and multiply and can come up. You know, don't import worms from elsewhere. There's plenty out there in your soil. Let's assist them to give them a job to do. Learn about the beneficial insects. There's almost a fear that the insects are that they're pests. And you learn what lives below your feet and learn to love it. And here are some of the mesofauna from Chaos of Delights website. It's like get to know the beautiful world that exists below our feet, and then we can protect it. And just on a couple of slides, I just couldn't not talk about this, but solastalgia is the grief from the loss of our natural environments. It's a sense of homesickness, even when we're at home. And I believe that we, especially in these days when we are losing landscapes around us so much, as we're feeling this sense um, of grief, of loss. And actually, the way to solve that sense of homesickness or longing that we get, a lot of cultures have words for this actually. And a way to solve this is to go out and touch the soil. Put your hand in a plant pot if you have to, is what I always say. But touching soil can really help with solastalgia. Look for the rainbows, go and find the little mini habitats beneath your feet. Find the different soil systems and get to know them, and see that there's lots of wonderful work being done. Um, and that is me for now. That's my email address, and I will just pass over to Kate Sankey. Thank you.
Thanks, Arlene. That was really great. And just to say, if we do, we're getting close to the time. So if you have any questions for Kate, who has to leave at 1 p.m., pop them in the chat and we can use the sort of Eventbrite contact to get those answers to you, at a later date if we need to. But yeah, Kate, let us know if you need any help getting the presentation up. And I think a really lovely complimentary presentations there. So thank you, Arlene. A
Unmute
nice
myself, didn't
segue into Kate.
I? Right. Right. Can you see me and hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and greetings from the Castle of Stirling, a very wet place, and indeed from the largest raised peat bog in the entire British Isles. So soil is pretty important to me here. So I'm Kate Sankey. Interesting to hear Arleen's background. I'm an environmental scientist and an educator, and now I'm a farmer and a creative artist. And I think that is part of the evolution that has happened with me in the 25 years that I've been farming here at West Moss Side Organic Farm. What I hope to do very briefly is to explain my kind of relationship with the land, and by dint of the land, the soil is what I am farming, where I live, and where my connections with the systems come together. And those systems I'm thinking of are, and Arleen has explained, biodiversity, water, and people's management of that land. So it's so the soil is the common ground, if you like. How what's ha what has evolved over the 25 years? I've been working with the land itself, understanding the soil, understanding its capabilities, understanding its needs, um, and together with that, use my own skills, some of which are scientific skills, but mostly a bit, again, listening to Arleen, there's a lot of kind of passion. There's a gut feeling about how you know the land needs to be looked after. So the land and the animals that I have come together in a kind of love for the place, and I think you can't get away from that being important. So perhaps what I didn't realize, and I certainly didn't articulate at the beginning, was that all my working and my thinking was of a regenerative manner. When I took on West Moss Side Farm, it is, as I say, on the Castle of Stirling, flat as a pancake. The good ground is pure clay, really difficult to manage, but is mineral rich. It's the remnants of it being part of the fourth estuary, and the soil being laid down under the water as rich mineral marine clays, and then the remnant of the moss, the bog, Flanders moss. So what I hadn't realized perhaps at the beginning was that all the work that I've been doing has been building the resilience of the land, of the production of beef, which would provide a good building block for what we are now facing, and it's becoming more and more clear, is that we need to have farming that resilient to climate change. And that's all about biodiversity. It's about natural flood management. And for me, there's that added extra, and it's about sharing that knowledge. And the way that I have always done it is through education and learning, but also in inspiring through creative art. I'm a basket maker and a general twiddler weaver of natural materials. So that's the added value, if you like, of me as a farmer here in this place, which is West Moss Side. However, farming is practical. I left academia, and I'm now entirely dependent on what the farm can provide me as a person. And I have over the years had a number of different activities, including a yurt business which now has closed, but it's an evolution, it's working with the land, and it's getting that life-work balance where your link with the land is extremely important. So let me just give you a quick rundown of what I have. Well, bog is number one and the most important. So it's the raised bog, Flanders moss. It's a national nature reserve. It's recognised as being the largest peat bog in the entire British Isles. It is a carbon sink as long as it's looked after and is kept as a working bog. And it grows 1 millimetre a year, which doesn't sound very much, but if you times that by 10,000, it's very, very significant. So I've got almost 50 acres of the bog. Then the edge of the bog, which is rough grazing, which is part peat, where my cattle are on. And then I have about 60 odd acres of what is described as arable land. That is the mineral-rich clays, and that's where I grow grass as fodder for hay. And I planted 25 years ago about 5 acres of woodland. It's along the river, so I have a river edge, and currently I have 30 head of Shetland cattle, which I'll tell you a little bit about later. So it's a farm basically, and that is my natural asset is the land, and that is totally dependent on the soil characteristics. Oops, is that right? Yeah. Okay, what I want to just dwell on for a moment is the organic nature. I've been organic since 2000, and the value and the importance of organics, I think, is worth just thinking about. First of all, in terms of climate resilience, organic farming uses much less energy, and therefore is also reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The reason for that, if you think about it, organic farm has far less input. So there are no artificial fertilizers, insecticides, fungicides, and all the chemical input that a traditional farm would have. And so it's a much less input and therefore much less output of greenhouse gases. If you think also about how the grassland is permanent grassland, so there is not the input of tractors and ploughing and all that management. And very importantly, the grass mix that I use is very diverse. It's what's called a ley, a herbal ley. So it doesn't include just grasses, but a lot of herbs which have rooting systems that are all at different levels. So the soil has a much higher organic matter. It also stores more carbon, and sometimes it's thought as being, carbon farming. That is true, but one of the things that people talk about is fixing carbon. Well, in a natural system, you don't actually fix carbon. It's part of a cycle. So there is always carbon moving from the soil to the atmosphere. It's a question of getting that balance of keeping as much as you possibly can underground for as long as you can, and therefore the balance is what you're looking at. The same source of information as Arleen mentioned, the FAO UN agency reckons that in terms of soil organic matter, the organic system is much more efficient. And in fact, my soil analyses show that I have almost 10% organic matter in my soil, where the sort of norm that you want to not go below is 3%. So very effective. So all in all, an organic system is good for the soil, and therefore it's good for the soil. It's good for other ecosystem functions like water retention and pollination and natural pest control. So that's all good. That's all good. Okay, let me just take you through, just because you're not here with me, I've got some photographs to take you to my farm. We mentioned that water is pretty dominant in my life. And looking after the bog is a major issue. So I have a small herd of rare breed Shetland cattle. Now, these animals are traditional animals. They are well adapted to being wet and cold a lot of the time. But very importantly, they will graze out the rough vegetation, and in particular, the regrowth of birch trees. If you've got a bog, you do not want trees. It's a bit of an anathema, but it's true, because trees soak up water, and that's the last thing you want for a bog. You want to keep the water in the bog to keep the peat-forming mosses happy. So the interventions I make is damming ditches to keep the water on the bog. The cattle in the summer months are grazing on the moss, and then various other ways of damming ditches that you can see there. So the peat, managing the peat, is number one, and then of course, because of climate change, it's getting wetter and wetter. This is the same field on the left-hand side. So sometimes I have a complete lake, and other times the grass is there, but very much enjoyed by pink-footed geese at this time of year. I also have just taken ownership, or not ownership, moved in with me, is a bunch of beavers. They've just come up the Goodie, probably from the River Forth. They're everywhere now in this area. So they're happily creating another habitat for me. The sphagnum moss here is just a perfect habitat for the common darter. So insects, mammals, birds are finding that if the wet ground is very good for them. Really important is the farm is a farm, and its main production is hay. So that's what's being produced, and it's traditional for this area. But there is a big problem here, because the hay or the grass that is grown in a traditional farm is almost single species, which is called Timothy hay, Timothy grass. And they're very famous on the Carse of Stirling. And when you drive through across the Carse, you will, in the summer, you'll see fields and fields of just grass. Most of that, however, is being made into silage and not hay. Silage is cut early, and is very depleting on the soil, because you cut the grass, you bale it, and you wrap it in black plastic bags, as you've seen all over the place. And then you put more fertilizer on, and then in 6 weeks' time, you come again, cut again, and make more silage, sorry. And that can be, in some of the farms on the Carse, you might even get four crops of silage. Now, but the only way you get that, there's no such thing as a free lunch, is you have to fertilize in between. And you can imagine the soil is just tired. It's just being asked to do, unnaturally boosted again and again. So in an organic system and in my system, I put organic fertilizer on, which is seaweed, and I just have one crop of hay, which is made at the end of July. So there is standing grass until the end of July. Really important for this bird, the curlew, which is my absolute love. They stupidly nest in hayfields, but nobody tells them that they're going to be cut. So terrible loss of curlews, mainly because of the change of farming practice to from hay to silage. So my herbal ley is full of all sorts of soft herbs, particularly you can see it where it's cut. So it's very nutritious and the soil is happy. Okay, the other advantage of my management is to create areas where you've got a mixed height of vegetation. This is my rush area, and it is very much good for insects like the special large heath butterfly, which is very rare and finding it pretty well only on Flanders moss and a few other areas close to wetland. And then my cattle also are doing a job. So another example of the management being sensitive to the kind of soil, kind of land. And then we all know about edges, field edges, and that grow things might seem like weeds, thistle, docks, and yellow flag and nettle, all really good news for biodiversity. And then just to add on at the end, all those plants inspire me for my creative work. I grow a lot of willow, which obviously loves wet ground. I'm a basket maker, and I run a lot of workshops at the farm. And that just describes some of the things that happen. But you're more than welcome to come and visit. I'll take you a walk across the farm, and you can, as it were, put your hands in the soil and feel connected to the place. And I think that I've probably got a farm that is now as resilient to climate change as is possible, and well, we'll see what the next 25 years have in store. Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Kate. Yeah, it's a wonderful place, and you're so welcoming. And as you say, I guess that's in your education nature there to share what you're doing. And we had a wonderful time at a soil symposium last year where you came along and had sort of small samples of what you had on your land there. It was really lovely. I'm conscious of the time, so does anyone have any questions for our speakers in the last couple of minutes? They were both so informative, so I think in themselves have provided a lot of answers and a lot of interesting information there. Lots of thanks in the chat as well. So yeah, huge thanks to you both for that. I think you've probably answered it mainly yourself, Kate, with how to get involved. How do people get involved in the sort of nature restoration work with I know with Flanders moss, is there a way to tap into that as well? Would that be through your farm?
Sorry, I missed that.
Or just wondering if anyone wanted to sort of do any volunteering around Flanders moss. Is there a good connection there?
Yes, well, as it happens today, I've got a bunch of Forth Valley College, not students, but young people with extra support needs, and they're coming and helping on the farm. And so a Wednesday is a day where lots of things happen, and I have quite a few friends who come. This time of year, it's about harvesting willow. Um, as far as the Flanders moths, they also have a volunteer group. Um, so you can get stuck in actually, working, building some of those dams. And so the contact there is Nature Scott.
Mhm.
And I can put in I'm just putting in the chat my website address, but I'll also write the name of the person who runs the volunteer for the moths.
Thank you. That would be really helpful. And I think, for this one, and Arlene, you had so many good snippets of websites and really good infographics and things. So maybe for this one, we'll make sure we've got maybe a list of the links or the presentation, uh, maybe in the description of our recording up online so that you can easily access those as well. And I'll just give you time to post that, Kate, but otherwise,
Yes, I think I've just sent it to Martine, not to everybody. Send chat to meeting group chat. Okay, try that again. Okay.
thanks,
So
Kate.
that's
Um,
my website.
I'll quickly plug our next adaptation event is going to be on retrofitting. So please do make it along to that one as well. Again, we're conscious that these are super broad themes, and we're literally just touching the surface with a few of our guest speakers, but really they've been really enjoyable so far. So our retrofitting one is on the 19th of March, 12 o'clock again. So please do have a look at our Eventbrite profile and also sign up to be a member if you want to get things like newsletters or also have a place to share what you're interested in and see what the other members have are working on in Forth Valley. You get to see a bit of the themes that they work on around climate. Thank you, Kate, there for that
Yeah.
connection. Great. And so I will leave you all to your lunch and offer huge thanks to our speakers again for joining us and for everyone for sparing their time to listen in. And yeah, hope to see you again soon.